Hi, I'm Lindsay Hull, Head of Thought Leadership at S&P Global Sustainable One.
And I'm Esther Wielden, a Senior Writer on the Sustainable One Thought Leadership team.
Welcome to ESG Insider, an S&P Global podcast where Esther and I take you inside the environmental, social, and governance issues that are shaping the rapidly evolving sustainability landscape.
We're just back from Climate Week NYC, where we spent the week attending some of the hundreds of events that took place across New York City. Lindsay, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure I walked about 4 miles a day just getting from event to event across the city. How about you? Are you recovered yet?
Nearly, although I flew too close to the sun trying to wear high heels for 5 days straight and threw my back out toward the end of the week. But now back home and back to sneakers and sweatpants for me.
It seemed like Climate Week this year had ramped up pretty significantly. There were more events and a bigger turnout. And for the ESG Insider podcast, there were definitely more interviews. We interviewed the CEOs of Climate Group, CDP, the Science Based Targets Initiative, and the National Audubon Society. We were also an official podcast of the Nest Climate Campus, which meant that for 3 days during Climate Week, we had a booth for recording at the Javits Center.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing. And all together, we released 5 episodes, interviewed more than 20 sustainability leaders, and the podcast was downloaded nearly 17,000 times during Climate Week. We got also to meet so many of our listeners. So thank you to everyone who came and spoke to us last week. It's a thrill to meet members of our audience in person. I also got to see some pretty surprising speakers who showed up during the week to talk about different aspects of climate change. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, spoke at one event I went to for Travelist. That's a nonprofit he founded that works to make travel more sustainable. And then I was definitely fangirling, Esther, you saw me, when Bill Nye was being interviewed in a booth right next to ours. That's Bill Nye, the science guy, which, if you're a child of the 90s like me, was pretty thrilling. Before we dive into today's episode, Esther, what was your favorite part of the week?
You know, it's really hard to pick one because each conversation was so interesting. But if we're talking about surprising speakers, I got to sit down with hip-hop and pop artist A.Y. Young. A.Y. is a youth ambassador for the United Nations, and he uses his music to spread awareness about sustainability issues, including the UN's 17 Sustainable Development Goals. A.Y. is also the founder of the Battery Tour, which uses 100% renewable energy to power the concerts. A.Y. was one of several people I spoke with at Climate Week who mentioned that those who work in the sustainability space need to do a better job at getting their message out to the general public. We'll hear more from him later in this episode. And this leads us to the topic of today's episode, climate literacy, and how it has a direct connection to businesses and the low-carbon transition.
On this podcast, we often hear how addressing climate change will require action across all aspects of society, from governments to businesses and nonprofits to individual citizens. And that last group plays a lot of important roles as consumers, as voters who influence policy direction that governments take, and also in making up the workforce that's needed for the low-carbon transition. The International Energy Agency, or IEA, has projected that current climate and energy-related policies of governments will drive the addition of 8 million clean energy jobs by 2030. But we also heard at Climate Week this year that many people around the world are not getting the information they need about climate change, including opportunities it presents, such as future green jobs.
Today, we'll explore this challenge and hear about some of the ways to solve it with Kathleen Rogers, president of EarthDay.org, which has been working for decades to raise public awareness about climate change. We also talk with Frank Niepold. Frank is Senior Climate Education Coordinator at the Climate Program Office of the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Frank co-authored a new climate literacy guide that NOAA published on September 24th. The report was created in collaboration with more than a dozen federal agencies, including the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Energy, and NASA. The guide was written for educators, communicators, and decision makers, and part of its goal is to advance the inclusion of climate education in school and other curricula. And we'll also hear from 2 companies later in this episode about how they are approaching this issue. First up, let's hear from Kathleen and Frank, who I sat down with together on the sidelines of the Nest Climate Campus. Here's our conversation.
So I'm a federal civil servant at NOAA in the Climate Program Office. I also coordinate 30 agencies under the U.S. Global Change Research Program on something called the Climate Engagement and Capacity Building Interagency Working Group.
All right, so Kathleen, you want to tell us a little bit about your role and a little bit about Earth Day?
Yes, so I'm the president of Earth Day. I've been there about 18 years, and the organization itself came out of the first Earth Day, which brought 20 million people out in the street and sort of changed the world because the legislators and President Nixon had never seen that many people. In fact, it remains the largest non-faith-based event in human history, 20 million people in a single day. Out of that came most of our environmental laws, including the National Environmental Education Act, which was the first one Nixon signed after the first Earth Day. My organization is global. We're doing Earth Day events in 192 countries, but we also work year-round. And one of the major programs at Earth Day is climate literacy and why that's important to solve the climate crisis.
Well, so tell me, for climate literacy, what is the challenge we're currently facing?
I mean, the biggest challenge we're facing right now it's a couple things. One is, we have millions and millions of educators in the United States of every form. There's so many forms of educators. There's museum educators, there's park educators, there's formal educators in elementary, middle, high, college, career and technical. And climate is a real challenge for them. So they're not comfortable and they're not knowledgeable about how to do this work right now. So if we don't overcome those two barriers, comfort and knowledge, they're just not touching it. They're professionals. Asking a professional to do something they're not trained to do is a tall order. We've got some who are moving into this space, but we have a lot of room. When you talk to young people, they want climate to be taught to them. They want to see it in their education programs of any form. And it's not happening.
So it sounds like it's a mixture of the educators in whatever format, teacher, museum, whatever.
You got it.
Not really knowing what talking points can be most useful and how to frame it.
It's beyond talking points, right? Because I'm an educator. I was a teacher for a long time. And they don't want talking points. It has to go way deeper than that. It takes about 70 to 80 contact hours of professional development across time with cohorts using the materials you're going to use in order to change practice. That's the recipe. That's a heavy amount of investment if you want those professionals to do better and different work that supports those young people.
Our program, we started this many moons ago. Environmental education's been key to Earth Day, and it's been primarily, I'll call it extracurricular, because Earth Day is something everybody teaches. They teach in the classroom, but it's not part of the curricula. So about 10 years ago, we started looking at two things. What had the environmental community writ large screwed up? And how could we fix it? And one of the biggest things we discovered was that not only our messaging, but the way we went about it, whether it was I'm a lawyer, not an educator, but regulatory, lawsuits, whatever it was, we had failed to educate not just the American public, because we're global, but everyone around the world. And so we came at this from a completely different tact. And in discussing this with governors in the United States, in discussing it with school superintendents, in doing a World Bank study around the world, we discovered that what particularly the lesser developed nations want, they want money. They're completely willing to educate their students. They don't have the funding for education to begin with, and they want financial assistance, and they want to see a connection to jobs, to economic development. And the kids, and I've got them, are exactly the same. They're crushed by the negative attitudes about climate change, number one, and dispirited. But they also want solutions, deployment solutions, jobs. They want to be entrepreneurs, innovators. And Earth Day's position is, and this is going to sound radical, is that if we're going to look at climate, we need to look at it as if it's the best thing since sliced bread, because it gives us the opportunity to change everything. But in order to do that, we have to educate the kids, give them hope, have incentives for foreign governments and U.S. governments. In the U.S., but what we have is a political problem. We have states in the U.S. that will not teach climate at all. They've struck the words from their curriculum. So we have to be really cautious, and Earth Day is the big tent, and we have to be really focused on what are the benefits of adding more time, more curricula, more things to teach, how to teach it to teachers that are not, don't have a huge amount of incentive to take on this burden. So we need to put massive amounts of money into teacher training. But we don't think it's a science subject. We think it belongs in gym, art, music, history, math, everywhere. And in order to do that, we need to spend a lot of money and pay a lot of attention. And that's the business Earth Day's in, is bringing those values but attaching it to a future, one that's positive to overcome the incredible angst that young people have, but also to bring them ideas about how they can participate in recovery from this global crisis.
Yeah, we've heard that on the podcast before about how they already are aware there's a problem, a lot of the students, but then they just feel discouraged because they're not sure what they can do. And it sounds like you're hearing the same thing. And
100%.
Yeah.
But I mean, what we're seeing right now is a lot of the climate leaders they've been working on all the business side of this for a really long time. But what they have not appreciated adequately is the workforce that you need does not exist. And workforce begins at upper elementary. They don't get that. And this is at their own peril. Because if you want to electrify everything, you want to have heat pumps everywhere you can get them, you want to have electrification of all transportation possible, you want to do all of that, you don't have the people to do it. The young people don't have the signal from business what jobs are coming. Because the signaling is so important here. Because the signaling to teachers, oh, I'm not preparing the current workforce, I'm preparing the future workforce. And which is that? There's a massive pivot going on in this country. We are short millions of electricians, full stop. But that signal to young people, that's a great job. I've got 3 sons. One of them would be a brilliant electrician. Currently, he's thinking about a physician assistant. That might change, but he's got nobody signaling to him other than his dad, and I need some help on that. But the point is that like business is going to be short capacity. We know there are workforce bottlenecks all over the place in the climate space. But if you're going to hit the full deployment of these climate solutions by business in partnership with government, you got to have a workforce of the future that is going to land at the time. If not, you're not going to get it done.
So the goal is this report can be something that an educator can use as sort of a starting point.
For me, it's not the educator, it's the education systems, right? So the schools and the universities and the career and technical schools.
So to integrate into their curriculum.
Absolutely. But a teacher, we used to think the teacher was the agent of change, but that's an edge strategy. The teacher is not the edge, if you want, because there's a simple scenario. You're walking down the hallway to your class. There are 4 teachers that teach that class. The one teacher said, I'm going to do right by climate over here. The other 4 teachers who teach that same subject aren't. This is an all students, all learners move. And so you have to use the systems and work the systems if you want that to occur. You can't just go to individual teachers.
Okay, so we mentioned sort of the business angle earlier in terms of they're not sending another signal, right, of that there's going to be jobs out there and that they're looking for this and sort of the vision
in specific ways.
Yeah. And that includes engaging from elementary on,
sure.
Right? If you were talking to businesses this week, which I imagine you probably are to some extent, what would you tell them they should do? Like, what steps should they be taking?
Can I answer that first?
Yeah, you go first.
So, first of all, I think the extraordinary thing I've learned, again, I'm a lawyer. I spent my life doing lawsuits and regulatory things, and I switched to the movement building business, which is very, very different. And unique. Earth Day is very unique in that way. My conversations with business it's the easiest. I'm so used to resistance from business. The easiest sell I've ever had. They recognize what Frank said is the jobs. The second part of this, and this is what I learned from UPS, Laura Lane, who's the senior VP, and what she said to me, and we had a business meeting, and they all agreed, 80 to 85% of innovation comes from inside a company, not outside the company. So whether you're a UPS driver or someone working for Microsoft, the challenge for them is to keep their jobs, to move up the ladder, and they're innovators. And what they're looking for at UPS and Microsoft are people that truly understand not the science of climate, which is you burn fossil fuels and it reflects and all this stuff. That takes about 10 minutes if you're really a business. What they want to know is how do you translate all of that into facing this enormous opportunity of the future to change things and to stay ahead of the game. And we got a lot of competition around the world, whether it's China, India, you name it, the Middle East. They're all driving towards efficiency, a green economy, and making money. And so that's the opportunity Earth Day sees, which is kind of a strange position for an environmental organization that came out of protests in the first Earth Day. But we have made that leap of faith and said, this is going to be a combination of people like Frank, teachers, business, NGO community, the media, to get it together and say, we have left billions of kids behind on this conversation. We've been negative. We haven't been looking towards the future. And it's going to also do two other things. One is help kids support, as they grow up, political policies that are tough to take. And second, it really will give them an economic future, but it also makes them green consumers, which is another thing businesses need. They need to sell the stuff, right? That's why Microsoft and all these other companies led the computer revolution, because they wanted to make money. The Industrial Revolution was driven by the Carnegies of the world. They needed people who could read and write. The U.S. didn't have mandatory education, grade school education, until 1923. And it was the result of these industrialists who said, okay, we can't do this. We need educated people. So we've seen this in revolution after revolution. Now business is jumping in.
Because they know they're going to need this workforce.
Yes, and they want them to be innovators, educators, buyers, voters, because they're putting billions of dollars into this. And the U.S. government's doing the same thing through the Reduction Act, IRA. It's been an extraordinary thing, watching the loans go out. But in order to have the workforce, as Frank and I have been saying, you need educated people.
100%. But you asked, what does business need to do here? Right. And so like I'm really good at picking up signals. I track really well. And I'm not hearing from the business sector what Kathleen just said in clear, resounding, and unequivocal way. Because without that signal, why would a young person today go, that's a different future. I'm going to choose that over this. And I'm going to begin preparing which classes I take, which internships I take, which majors, which universities, maybe I'm going to go into a career that is more trade oriented, because we need so many people in the trades, more than we have. Without that, we're not, the systems as they are right now are not serving business well. And until we hear that signal from them, we're ready to get to work, to build that workforce, to build that citizenry.
So does that mean then public messaging? Does that mean going to the schools to talk to them? Like, what is the mechanisms that they can send those signals through?
I think if they ask that question, there's answers to those questions. I'm not going to give you those right now because it's a multitude. But if they were serious, then they would actually start moving out, well, what is the message we want? How do we generate that message, and how do we deliver that message in clear, resounding, and resonant ways? But until I hear that, and I've got really good hearing, and I'm not hearing it, I'm not seeing it, I'm not reading it, that means if I'm not seeing it, they're definitely not seeing it, because I'm looking for it. They're not. So that's got to surprise them. So, whether it's social media, I'm not a big fan, but whatever channels you got, light them up with a resounding message. There's tons of people in this space who know how to test messages. That's not a problem. The clients aren't asking, as far as I can tell. Now, if they are, and I'm speaking to somebody, amp it up.
Yeah, and I feel like sort of the opposite of that, because, of course, unlike Frank, I'm out there in business, talking to business every day. The investors are here in the thousands, and they're talking about an educated workforce. They're talking about, they're mostly talking about money, but they're looking for people that know that are going to be the next generation, the people that are following through, that they can grind through 18 hours a day and make their businesses successful. They are talking about it, but I think we need to have, and that's what Earth Day is doing, hopefully in tandem or in parallel with the U.S. government, but certainly because we're global, we're hearing a different story. In every country, Great Britain, France, Germany, lesser developed countries, Brazil, they're looking for their workforce of tomorrow because they want to protect their resources, join the green economy, do all these things, and they understand it. What they need is money. And that's why I think this signaling is important, because regardless of what your political perspective is on where the U.S. stands today with all of our problems and issues, we still send important signals to the rest of the world. So I think Frank may be correct. He's not hearing it, but we're hearing it in like thunder. People want educated buyers, supporters, and innovators.
It sounds like they're talking about in their circles, but maybe it's not being projected.
Yeah, and so that's our whole role, is
Frank,
building that bridge.
If they are, and I'm so happy that they are, you're hearing that in those circles, but the people that need to hear it, because remember, a kid who walks into a middle school at 6th grade in the United States, they're 10, 11. Within 10 years of preparation, they're now 21. So between then and now, 10 years from now, that sixth grader today, what they do between sixth grade and graduating college or a career and technical high school or an apprenticeship is critically important. If you want that to happen, it is not happening in the ears of the people that influence or support those parents, teachers, administrators, museum leaders. They're not hearing it. So if that signal, we have a great opportunity here, because if it's in those circles, now move it out.
Kathleen noted that many of today's climate innovations have come from people inside of companies. We wanted to hear from some of those companies, so I sat down with Gail Schuler, 3M's Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer. 3M is a technology and manufacturing company with more than 60,000 products in its portfolio, ranging from office and home supplies to industrial products and solutions related to safety, transportation, electronics, and healthcare. Here's Gail talking about what she heard on the topic of technology innovation and green jobs at Climate Week.
Well, I mean, it's great to be here at Climate Week. I've actually lost track of how many I've been to. It's been quite a few now. But one of the things a couple years ago, it started to flow to hear more and more about recognition that materials solutions were really key. And now it's really building momentum. I was at a panel this morning that was about artificial intelligence and materials and how to bring that forward for advancing against our collective challenges. Climate tech is a big area. We believe that material solutions that we can develop are going to be really important in that space. And we just launched Greenworks, which is a new video that showcases how green jobs work and how there's going to be more and more green jobs in the future, even how you can make your job a little bit more like a green job.
It's interesting you mentioned the jobs thing. You're 3 out of 4 people I've talked to so far on this trip have brought up career and jobs and getting the workforce of the future. Why do you think that is such a big focus this year?
Well, it's interesting. You know, one of the things that was a strong aha for me at COP last year, so that's the UN Climate Conference, was really that we had been focused on science and we'd been focused on urgency and collaboration, which we need to do. But we were kind of recognizing that we had left a lot of the human aspect behind, and we needed to do a better job of that. So I, for one, and I don't think I'm alone, started paying a lot more attention to what is the human side of this? How do we get more people engaged? Some of it is storytelling. Some of it is recognizing how people really can make a difference, whether it's in your job or your behaviors at home.
Gail said there's a growing recognition that we've left a lot of the human aspect behind in our focus on urgency and collaboration. And earlier we heard Frank of NOAA say that businesses are failing to send a clear signal to the general public of the kinds of green job opportunities they expect to offer. But I also heard from several companies that they are taking steps to help address the looming green workforce gap. One of them is Trane Technologies, a company that focuses on sustainable HVAC and refrigeration systems. HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. I talked with Holly Paper, Trane Technologies' president of Commercial HVAC Americas business. She started off by describing what her company is doing to help address the workforce skills gap.
Trane Technologies is a climate innovator, and that's how we describe ourselves. And it's really a company that's 100% focused on sustainability. It's who we are. It's not part of the strategy. It is the strategy. And we innovate for climate solutions for homes, for transport, for businesses, for industries, in terms of making things hot and cold.
So primarily like HVAC and cooling and heating systems?
Yeah,
okay.
HVAC, cooling and heating systems, also industrial process heating and cooling, mission critical heating and cooling, transport refrigeration, and businesses like that. We go to market with the Trane brand as well as the Thermo King brand, our primary strategic brands. We have generally the technology, the innovation that we need today. What we don't have enough of is the people to help scale that. So the next generation of skilled workers, the up-and-coming STEM innovators, and all of those that support that. And so there's just a tremendous opportunity, I think, not only to kind of invent new stuff, but to attract more people to the field and to our organizations to help us deploy it faster so we can go change the world. And I think that's part of why it's so exciting to see so many people here. It's a proof of momentum in the industry, and I'm hoping some tailwind to help us on the talent side as well.
Are you confident that we'll have the workforce we need?
We spend a lot of time as a company working on this and thinking about this. We do a lot in the communities around literally starting in middle school and helping get people inspired to stay in STEM and STEM in a climate forward sort of way. We spend a ton of energy and time on like the technician workforce. So we use a lot of service technicians that install HVAC equipment and service that equipment. And it's the skilled trades that become really important there. And so we're spending a lot of time with apprentice programs and really new workforce innovation models to help change the industry on that front. That said, there are still, tens of thousands of open roles every year. And as a company, we're doing a lot. We need others to help push to make it cool again, to do some of these roles.
Make HVAC cool again?
To make HVAC, no pun intended. Yes, yeah.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah,
it's great to talk to you.
Yeah, it's great to talk to you as well.
So we've heard what the public and private sector can do to improve climate literacy. At the top of this episode, I mentioned I sat down with the musician AY. He talked about the role that music can play in educating the general public about sustainability goals, for example. Here he is.
I'm founder of the Battery Tour. I'm also like one of the 17 United Nations young leaders of the world, right? And I represent the youth in the U.S. under the Secretary General, Antonio Guterres.
So you talk to business people all the time, right?
Yeah,
what do you tell them?
No, I don't just talk to business people all the time. Really, when you say business people, I think of adult leaders.
Oh, I like that.
Right? And I talk to them all the time, not just as a youth leader, but as someone who's using music to bring every facet of humanity together. I specifically use the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 SDGs, to bring corporate, family offices, organizations that do the work, that implement the work, right, of the sustainable goals, artists, actors, athletes. I'm bringing them together through a music project so we can power change.
And talk to me about why you think having this way of communicating is so important. How does this fit into the broader climate literacy need?
Yeah, well, it's funny, like, I was coming back from Honduras, and I just brought energy to like a bunch of villages. There's a lot of people around the world who lack access to energy. There's like almost 1 billion people that don't have energy. And so I was getting the world plugged in with Battery Tour, right? I do these concerts, and they raise money, and I build some boxes or solar stuff, or I help deploy solutions, right? And I was coming back, and I got the call from the Secretary General about these goals, right? And he was telling me about the 17 goals, and I had no idea what they were.
Never heard of them before,
right?
probably.
And that's what I told him. I was like, bro, more people know Johnny Depp's relationship. Or when Lil Wayne says or when Kim Kardashian posts.
Yeah.
There's clearly a communication issue. For some reason, I know when Kendrick Lamar dropped a song about Drake and dissed him. But if you ask the average person, what is the gender equality goal? What is sustainability? Yeah. They have no idea. Yeah. So I know that the best way to fix that is through culture and music. And that's what I'm doing.
You think it could get to a place that other messaging can't?
Well, it's already doing that.
Yeah.
Right? I've done 958 concerts with 100% renewable energy. We just did Times Square, and independently, my live stream reached like over 5 million people. We are doing it in a dope, cool way, because not only am I talking about these things in a way that makes sense, because the goals of the framework. So if you have a passion for mental health or gender equality or climate action, there's a goal for you. There's a more clear path to plug into, right? So the music really helps that, because the lyrics and the music is behind that, and that's what I'm doing, and that's what I'm bringing to the world. I think that's why youth and kids are responding, and that's why so many adult leaders are coming on board, right? General Motors, Samsung, BNP, those are sponsors of what I'm doing. Adults that are seeing this is the way. So yeah, I mean, it is working now. I'm just trying to get everyone plugged in.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's so great to meet you also.
And just to let you know, dude, I'm on the road to 1,000, right?
Wow. 1,000 place concert.
Yeah, I just announced that yesterday.
Wow.
With Bill
so how
Clinton.
Many are you at? You said you're at
958.
See, we're almost at 2 million downloads, which is a small number compared to that.
Almost on 2 million.
We're gonna hit the goal. We're gonna hit the goal.
Maybe we hit the goal. Maybe I'll see you at Show 1,000, because we're going to do it in April, Earth Day. We meet back up.
I would love
and
that.
We see if you hit your goal, and
we'll check in and be like, "Did you get
right?
there?" Today, we've heard how we still have a lot of work to do in the world of climate literacy, and how it has a direct tie to ensuring we have a workforce with the green skills needed for the low carbon transition. What Frank said about how the 10-year-olds of today will be our workforce of tomorrow really stood out to me as a reminder of the important role of integrating climate into education. And we also heard from AY how there are multiple ways to spread the information to the general public, including through music.
Climate literacy was one of many, many topics that came up during Climate Week NYC, and we have so much more to cover. So please stay tuned for more of our interviews and key takeaways. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of ESG Insider. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe, share, and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
And a special thanks to our agency partner, the 199. See you next time.